Hey guys, so first things first, there's going to be two videos this week, okay? The first one is going to be over political parties specifically in the state of Texas. The second one is going to explain more about political parties in general throughout the entire United States, okay? So first off, we're going to look at the early party roots in Texas. Right now in the 1800s, Texas becomes a state, and all the way up through 1854, there is really no true party identity in Texas. Although they did tend to lean more Republican, it was still kind of a back and forth. There would be a sharp lean towards the Republican Party during Reconstruction. Now, Reconstruction obviously came about at the end of the Civil War, and that was essentially when the United States government sent soldiers down into the South after the war until things really started to get back on track. And during that time, there was a big shoot up in Republican votes. Now, this was for several different reasons. One of those big reasons, though, being is that the freed slaves in general, once they got the right to vote, were voting Republican in the South. And that would go on until the end of Reconstruction, whenever they would start putting in different laws for segregation, things like that, when they would put in Jim Crow laws. And Jim Crow laws would obviously make it very difficult for minorities to vote, to the point where it would essentially switch back and become very strong Democrat stronghold. But during this time of Reconstruction, there were other people that were voting, not just freedmen that were pushing the Republican Party. One of those groups would be referred to as carpetbaggers. Now, this is a derogatory term, and it's used by many white Southern Democrats for their Northerners who moved to the South after the Civil War and then voted Republican here and swayed the state. You can hear some of the same kind of controversies now from people that are very, very strong on the hard right Republican side about people that are moving into the state from places like California or New York, and they complain about them trying to turn the state blue. And legitimately, though, Texas has always had a big divide between the rural areas and the bigger cities, and the bigger cities tends to be more Democrat, right? Now, the another term they used was scallywag, and it's aimed at white Southerners who support the Republican Party and Reconstruction policies in the South. Now, the end of Reconstruction from 1870 all the way up through the 1960s, Texas becomes part of something called the Solid South, and in the Solid South, almost every single seat in those states is held by Democrats. That's for federal and state seats. Texas was no different. Now, with this came another term that we're going to talk about, yellow dog Democrat. So what does this mean? Well, it's someone who would vote for a Democrat regardless of who they are. These are your straight ticket voters. They're going to vote straight Democrat no matter who, right? Blue no matter who. I think that was the term that was used a while back. Now, in Texas, they start turning away from the Democrat Party after the 1960s. Now, there are several reasons this happened, but we're going to go over just a few of them. The Civil Rights and Voters' Rights Act was a big one in the 1960s. And then you have the change in Republican identity, okay? Republicans gradually become the national home for many conservatives, especially in Texas. On their regulations, social norms, anti-federal government message, these were not the norms. Early on, the Republicans were the more liberal of the two parties. It was the Democrats that was pushing for state rights and things like that, okay? And then you have Texas's specific political building blocks, all right? Texas Republicans slowly built a real party structure inside the state, recruited candidates, and they started to begin to win elections. Now, one of the biggest ones was 1978, when Bill Clements was the first Republican Texas governor since Reconstruction elected into office. Now, the last Democrat that we had in office was Ann Richards not too terribly long ago. So, from 1970 to 1980, Republicans start to win these statewide elections. 1990, Republicans break through more consistently, and by the end of that decade, they're taking over statewide seats. And commonly cited, it marks 1994 was the last time a Democrat won a statewide seat in Texas. Now, that's not talking about like Texas State House or Senate. That's generally lieutenant governor, the governor's seat, the attorney general, things like that, okay? So there are other groups in Texas. It's not just all Democrat and Republican. We have our third parties here. We have the Libertarian Party here. We have the Green Party here. And while they don't hold any seats, they do add to the political discussion. Just those parties being around and having at least somewhat of a strong following, at least in comparison to other third parties, the Republicans and Democrats do pay attention to what these third parties are wanting. Now, there is another third party that we're going to talk about, and this was big in the state of Texas. It was actually really strong in pushing for very specific things, and that is the La Raza Unido Party. All right. And what did it do? Well, it's one of the most historically important third parties in Texas for a reason. They were formed in Crystal City, Texas, January of 1970 by Mexican-American activists and organizers who were connected to the Chicano movement. All right. Its purpose is to create an independent political vehicle for Mexican-Americans who believed the major parties were ignoring and exploiting their communities. Now, they were political representation and power for the Mexican-American community here in the state. They believed in education equality, economic fairness, and they wanted some kind of local control. They were fighting against discrimination. They were fighting for inclusion. And the main reason that this matters is it showed that local political power could be built from the ground up, especially in South Texas, through school boards, city councils, and county-level positions. It also pressured Democrats and then later Republicans to take Mexican-American issues and their candidates more seriously. Another group that came up, and this wasn't necessarily a party in and of itself, but it was the Tea Party movement and what that actually did in Texas. Okay, now that came about in 2009 through 2010. It was motivated by opposition to government spending and taxes, anger at ballot and federal powers, a push for stricter constitutional conservatism. And in Texas, the Tea Party pushes the Republican Party further to the right in its primaries. It encourages and challenges the establishment. It helped to elevate hardline conservative messages and candidates in interpretary fights. Now, Texas, specifically when it comes to this, the Republican primary can be the real election. And so they start pushing to influence inside the GDP and reshape what Republican leadership actually looked like. Not just throughout Texas, but eventually throughout more of the United States. Next thing that we're going to talk about here is a Texas precinct convention. Okay, what it is, why it works, why it's such a big deal. In Texas, parties don't just campaign. They also run internal democracy through conventions. The precinct convention is a grassroots entry point for candidates. And if you vote in a party primary, you can usually participate in that party's precinct convention and often held on to primary night and to help choose a candidate. Now, delegates who move up to the county convention platform can sometimes sit in senatorial districts. See, in Texas, you don't register by party, but primary participation in party process creates affiliation for those election cycles, which is going to bring us really to something real simple, where we are today. Well, right now, Texas remains a very Republican-led state, with Republicans holding all the major seats in the executive branch. Okay, this is, again, governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, etc. All those things are held by Republicans. Now, just recently, we did have one of our House seats flipped in a special election from Republican to Democrat. That was a seat that hadn't been won by a Democrat since 1991, which leads some to believe that there is a chance that Texas may be turning really into a purple state, not necessarily a blue state, but getting closer and closer to actually becoming a swing state. One of those reasons is because there is more people migrating to the state, but also because our major metropolitan areas are very heavily Democrat controlled versus the more rural areas that are really strongly Republican. Now, the big issues that are driving this realignment include immigration, border policy, energy, education, taxes, cultural issues, and then plus you have turnout differences across regions. Now, there's several different ways that the state might go in aligning with political parties. The most likely probably is scenario A, that is that Texas stays very solidly a Republican state. Scenario B, Texas becomes a true swing state. That metropolitan growth continues, suburban migration starts to narrow, turnout starts to rise in these heavily Democrat-led populations, and candidates' quality and issue silence, like on the economy and schools, starts to shift the way that people view our politicians, okay? And scenario C is that Texas becomes a two-state map almost, where urban regions get bluer, rural regions get redder, and eventually this just leads us into this hard swing state scenario. Now, obviously there's more to this, but we're just going over the basics of it for this class. And like I said, make sure that you watch the other video. It's also really important for this class that you make sure that you read the chapter, because there's so much information here that I'm not going to be able to go through all of this on a quick online lecture. And so make sure that you read your chapter in the textbook so that you'll be able to pass the quiz and be better prepared whenever it's time to take the midterm. All right. Thanks, guys, and I will see you next week.